winters in San Diego are soft and refreshing, a nice little pause from the craziness of the rest of the year. That December of 2019, however, was far from refreshing. It was when I first realized the dangers of ignoring red flags, no matter how small. My name is Elise, and I've been working as an HR manager for over 6 years. I pride myself on maintaining professionalism, fostering a healthy work environment, and most importantly, setting boundaries. When Jeremy joined the team as a project analyst, he didn't stand out in any unusual way. He was polite, quick to learn, and got along well with others. But looking back, I wish I'd noticed the subtle signs sooner. Jeremy's compliments started innocently enough. Things like, "You're really great at leading these meetings," or "You handle everything so effortlessly." At first, I thought he was just being polite, but as weeks went by, his comments became more personal. One day, after a particularly long staff meeting, he stopped by my office. "You make it hard for people not to admire you, Elise," he said with a smile that lingered uncomfortably longer than it should have. I laughed it off awkwardly and thanked him before steering the conversation back to work. That should have been the end of it, but Jeremy was persistent. A week later, he asked me out for coffee after hours. I made it clear that I didn't date coworkers. "It's a company policy," I said straightforwardly. "I hope you understand." "Of course, I didn't mean to cross any lines," he replied. For a few days, everything seemed normal. Then the flowers started. At first, it was just one bouquet, bright yellow tulips, left on my desk with a handwritten note, "For the brightest person in the office." I assumed it was from a team member expressing gratitude, so I didn't think much of it. But then came another bouquet, this time with a more personal message. "I hope this brightens your day as much as you brighten mine." That's when I realized the sender was Jeremy. I decided to address it immediately. "Jeremy," I said during a private conversation in my office, "I appreciate the thought, but these gestures are inappropriate. I need to ask you to stop." He seemed embarrassed, nodding quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. But the next morning, a single rose was waiting on my desk with a note that read, "I can't stop thinking about you." I reported the situation to my boss, Diana. She was understanding but advised me to handle it delicately, since there hadn't been any outright harassment yet. "Document everything," she said. "If it escalates, we'll take further action." And escalate it did. A week later, I found my desk drawer slightly ajar. Inside was a small envelope containing a photo from the recent company holiday party. It was a candid shot of me laughing with some colleagues. In the corner of the photo, Jeremy stood watching, his expression oddly intense. The note attached read, "You don't belong with them. You belong with me." My heart sank. I started questioning every interaction, every passing look in the office. Was he watching me? Following me? Things came to a head one evening when I was leaving work late. The parking garage was mostly empty, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. As I approached my car, I noticed something was off. My windshield wipers were bent, and there was a small crack in the driver's side window. I hurried to get in, locking the doors behind me. As I reversed out of the spot, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Jeremy. He waved, a sheepish smile on his face. I didn't roll down the window. Instead, I drove off, keeping my eyes straight ahead. I decided to involve building security. They reviewed the footage from that evening, but Jeremy hadn't been caught on camera. "We'll keep an eye out," the guard assured me. Then, one Friday evening, I stayed late to finish some payroll tasks. The office was pretty quiet. As I organized files, I noticed a shadow move across the hallway. My breath caught. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing. Nothing. I walked to the door and peeked out, but the hallway was empty. Shaking it off as paranoia, I returned to my desk, only to find a note sitting on my keyboard. "You shouldn't be here alone." Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and called building security. The guard arrived quickly and escorted me to my car. The next day, I reviewed the footage with him. Sure enough, Jeremy had been in the office after hours, rifling through desks, mine included. That was the final straw. I compiled all the evidence, notes, photos, security footage, and reported it to Diana. The company immediately suspended Jeremy pending an investigation, and I filed a restraining order. But even after Jeremy was terminated, the fear didn't leave. Every time I walked to my car, I looked over my shoulder. I started varying my routes home, checking every lock twice before bed. Weeks later, I learned through a colleague that Jeremy had moved out of state. There were no further incidents, but the psychological toll remained. Looking back, I realize how easily I dismissed the early signs. Jeremy's behavior wasn't harmless. It was calculated. The experience taught me the importance of advocating for my safety. While I've moved on, a part of me will always carry that caution. It's not always strangers who pose the biggest threat. Sometimes they're sitting just across the office. It started out like any other Wednesday. The bell rang at 3:15 p.m., and I packed up my things, ready to leave school after another long day of teaching 7th graders. I'm a creature of habit, and my routine is a comfort. Call me odd, but every Wednesday, I stop at the same grocery store on my way home. It's never crowded in the late afternoon, and I've memorized the layout so well that I could probably shop blindfolded. On this particular Wednesday, I stopped at my usual store on the way home. The parking lot was half empty. It felt like the perfect time to unwind with some casual shopping. It was a small local grocery store, the kind that felt homey despite its dim lighting and slightly scuffed floors. I grabbed a basket and headed to the produce section, making mental notes of the week's specials displayed on handwritten chalkboards. As I reached for a bundle of bananas, I felt something, a prickling awareness that someone was looking at me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a man standing at the edge of the aisle. He wasn't looking at me directly, not yet, but his body was angled in my direction. I shook off the unease, but still, I took a detour to the bread aisle, wanting to put some distance between us. I told myself I was overthinking, that I'd been reading too many crime novels. But as I turned into the next aisle, there he was again. He had on a dark gray hoodie and jeans. His hood wasn't up, but his head was slightly bowed as if he were trying not to be noticed. Our eyes met briefly, and I gave him a polite smile before quickly looking away. He didn't smile back. The feeling in my stomach turned heavier. I adjusted my grip on my basket and kept moving. Maybe he's just shopping, I thought. It's not like I own the store. By the time I reached the dairy section, I had convinced myself I was being ridiculous. But then I saw him again, standing by the yogurt display. He wasn't even pretending to browse anymore. He was just there. I grabbed my carton of milk and made my way toward the checkout lanes, deciding I had enough groceries for one evening. As I stood in line, I risked a look over my shoulder. He was near the self-checkout area, his hands empty. He hadn't picked up a single item. My pulse quickened. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he just didn't know what he wanted to buy. But a small voice in my head whispered, "Leave. Just get out." I checked out as quickly as possible, shoved my receipt into my pocket, and made my way toward the parking lot. The sun was starting to set. As I approached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw him, now walking at a casual pace, heading in the same direction. I've never unlocked my car so fast in my life. As soon as I got in, I locked the doors and started the engine. He stopped a few rows away, standing still as I backed out of my parking spot. His hands were shoved into his pockets and his eyes were fixed on me. I pulled out onto the main road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. My house was only 10 minutes away, but I couldn't shake the heavy discomfort that wrapped around me. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, fearing I'd see his face again. Instead, I saw something worse. His car. A silver sedan had pulled out of the lot shortly after me. It stayed several cars behind at first, but as I turned onto quieter streets, it inched closer. By the time I reached my neighborhood, it was 2 cars behind me. I turned onto my street and immediately regretted it. My house was in a cul-de-sac, which meant I couldn't keep driving without making it obvious I was circling back. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, watching the silver sedan crawl slowly down the street. It made a U-turn in front of my house but didn't leave the neighborhood. Instead, it parked at the corner, just barely visible from where I sat. Adrenaline flooded my system. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation. The dispatcher was calm and professional, which helped steady me. "Stay inside your car or go into your home if it's safe to do so," she said. "An officer is on the way." I stayed in my car, peering through the rearview mirror at the sedan parked at the corner. A few minutes later, I saw movement. The driver, the man from the store, stepped out and stood next to his car, looking in my direction. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out his expression, but his posture screamed defiance, like he knew I was watching him and didn't care. Red and blue lights flashed down the street, and I let out a shaky breath I hadn't noticed I'd been holding. The man quickly got back into his car and sped off before the police could even pull into my driveway. 2 officers arrived and took my statement. They assured me they would patrol the neighborhood and keep an eye out for the silver sedan. "It's good you called when you did," one of them said. "Sometimes these things escalate if they're not addressed early." That night, I left the porch light on and my phone stayed close. I wasn't taking chances. The police never found the man or his car. A part of me wonders if he was just messing with me, a bored troublemaker looking for a reaction. But another part of me knows better. Now I never shop at the same time each week, and I always park as close to the entrance as possible. I installed cameras around my house, and I make a point of checking my surroundings before heading to my car. It's been over 2 years since that night, but I've never forgotten the fear of being followed. I've always loved sharing my life online. It makes sense since I'm a social media manager. Photos of my dog, Oliver, enjoying the Miami sunshine? Posted. A picturesque sunset walk by the beach? Shared. An artsy shot of my morning coffee? You bet. It felt harmless, even fun, connecting with others over little slices of my day. But the summer of 2018 taught me a hard lesson. Oversharing can open the door to people you don't want in your life. It started with an innocent enough direct message. The user's profile was generic, just a random photo of a palm tree and the handle Coastal Observer. "Hey, Oliver looks like such a happy pup. How old is he?" I assumed it was just a friendly comment from someone who loved dogs as much as I did. "He's 3, I replied, adding a smiling emoji. 3. No wonder he still has so much energy. I've seen you guys at Bayfront Park a few times. He loves chasing the seagulls, doesn't he?" The mention of Bayfront Park made me pause. I didn't recognize the username, and I wasn't sure how they knew where I walked Oliver. Still, I figured it wasn't worth worrying about. It wasn't exactly a secret. I'd posted plenty of pictures there. "Yep, he sure does," I replied, keeping it short. The messages continued over the next few days. "That new coffee shop you posted yesterday looked amazing. I've been meaning to try it. Is the outdoor seating dog-friendly?" I hadn't tagged the location in that post. How did they know where I was? I stopped responding, hoping the silence would discourage them. Instead, the messages became more persistent. Saw you at the park again today. Oliver looks even cuter in person. That one sent a chill through me. I hadn't posted anything that day, which meant they'd been there, watching us. One evening, as I was winding down, my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was another message from Coastal Observer. You should really lock your windows. Someone could just climb right in. My stomach dropped. I lived on the second floor of a small apartment building. The thought of someone scoping out my place, my life, made me feel exposed and violated. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, my phone trembling in my hand. Every detail of my apartment suddenly felt exposed, like the walls were made of glass. The layout, the secondhand furniture I'd so carefully picked out, the glow of my favorite reading lamp by the window. It all felt like a spotlight for a stranger's prying eyes. My safe haven was no longer mine. I blocked the account immediately, but the damage was already done. Blocking didn't erase the fact that they had been there, that they knew too much. Every shadow cast by the dim streetlight outside sent my heart racing. I locked every door and window, checking each one twice, then 3 times, but it didn't help. It felt like he was still here, watching from some unseen spot. I couldn't sit still. My mind kept picturing someone standing in the dark, staring up at my window, scanning the details I had unknowingly shared with the world. My dog, curled up at my feet, picked up on my unease. He lifted his head, his eyes darting toward the window like he could sense something too. That almost broke me. I turned off every light, sat on the floor with my back against the couch, and stared at the door, phone in hand, ready to call for help at the first sound of a knock. The thought wasn't just disturbing, it was devastating. I'd always loved connecting with people online, sharing glimpses of my life and seeing glimpses of theirs. It was my job, my passion, my outlet. But now, it felt like every post, every picture, every moment of joy I'd put out there had been twisted into something sinister. The thing I loved most had become a weapon used against me. I barely slept that night. And when I finally drifted off, it was only to wake up to nightmares of someone reaching through the window, pulling back the curtains I had once left open without a second thought. The next day, I received an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "You can't hide, Hazel." Inside was a photo of Oliver, sitting by my front door, taken from outside the window. I called my best friend, Riley, in a panic. "I don't know what to do," I said, pacing the living room while Oliver followed me nervously. "You need to go to the police," she urged. "This isn't just some troll. It's someone who's watching you." The Miami police were polite, but their words didn't exactly put me at ease. Unless they've made a direct threat or you catch them in the act, there's not much we can do, the officer explained. Frustrated but determined, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I reached out to a cybersecurity expert I knew through work. The expert, a guy named Derek, was quick to help. He tracked the IP address associated with the emails and traced it back to a nearby coffee shop's Wi-Fi network. While it wasn't a direct lead, it confirmed that the stalker was local. Derek also discovered that Coastal Observer had been using fake profile pictures and stolen content to appear legitimate. The account was a facade, but the person behind it was very real. "Whoever this is, they're putting a lot of effort into watching you," Derek warned. A week after involving Derek, I received a package at my doorstep. Inside was a collar with Oliver's name engraved on it and the words "Forever Yours" on the back. My hands shook as I held the collar. It was a clear message. He was taking it to the next level. That night, I stayed at Riley's place, unable to sleep. Every sound outside her window felt like a prelude to something terrible. The next morning, Derek called me. "I think I've got something." The email address they've been using is linked to another fake account. He forwarded me screenshots of the profile, photos of beaches, dogs, and sunsets eerily similar to my own posts. "This is obsession," he said. "You need to take every precaution." With Derek's help, I reported the stalkers' accounts to the platforms they were using. One by one, the profiles were shut down. The emails stopped. The messages disappeared. I moved to a new apartment a few months later, one with a gated entrance and better security. My social media habits changed drastically. No more geotags, no more photos of my apartment, and definitely no more real-time updates. I didn't see it then, but now I realize just how naive I was. Sharing little details about my life felt harmless, but in the wrong hands, those details became weapons. And while I've moved on, I still wonder who was behind Coastal Observer and what might have happened if I hadn't acted when I did. I've worked remotely for years, and let me tell you, being at home all the time can make you hyper-aware of every little noise outside. That's probably why I've developed an almost obsessive habit of monitoring my doorbell camera. Between grocery deliveries, Amazon packages, and the occasional meal delivery, I've gotten used to seeing delivery drivers show up at my door. But in December 2018, I learned the hard way that even the comfort of your own home can be deceivingly dangerous. It was a chilly afternoon in Phoenix. Not something you'd expect, but December has its moments. As a tech worker, I spent most of my time glued to my laptop, debugging lines of code and attending virtual meetings. That day, I was tackling a particularly stubborn issue when my doorbell rang. The camera feed popped up on my phone, showing a man in a brown uniform holding a small package. He looked harmless enough, middle-aged, average build, clean-shaven. Nothing unusual. I'd been ordering a lot of holiday gifts and work supplies. Still, something felt off. The man's uniform was wrinkled, and he kept his face tilted away from the camera. He seemed nervous. I shook off the unease, assuming he was just having a bad day. When I opened the door, I left the screen door locked. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I've got a package for you," he replied, holding up the small box. "Who's it from?" I asked, scanning the plain, unmarked package. "It's got your name on it," he said, avoiding eye contact. I didn't like his vague answers. "Can I see a delivery slip?" He just shoved the package through the screen door's gap and walked away without another word. I watched him disappear down the street. No delivery van, no bike, nothing to suggest he was actually a courier. When I opened the package, I found it was empty. Just an ordinary brown box with no markings or contents. Confused, I reviewed the footage from my doorbell camera that evening. The man had approached on foot, lingered by the street for a few minutes, and then walked straight up to my door. It didn't sit right with me, but there wasn't enough to act on, so I let it go. A few days later, just as I was getting ready for bed, there was another knock at the door. The clock read 10:30 p.m. I checked the camera feed and froze. It was the same man, but this time he wasn't holding a package. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his head swiveling as he scanned the street. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as he knocked again, harder this time. When I hit the intercom, he flinched, clearly startled. "Can I help you?" I asked. He muttered something I couldn't hear, then stepped back and peered into one of the windows. That was it for me. I shouted through the intercom, "Get off my property, now." He backed away slowly, his hands up as if to say he meant no harm. Once he was out of sight, I double-checked all the locks for good measure. The final straw came a week later. It was past midnight when my phone buzzed with a doorbell camera alert. Groggy and annoyed, I opened the app and my blood ran cold. The man was back, crouched by my front door with a flashlight in one hand and a small toolkit in the other. He was trying to pick the lock. I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was attempting to break into my home. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking for details about the man's appearance and his actions. Meanwhile, I watched the camera feed, unable to look away. He worked quickly, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. My heart pounded as I silently begged for the sound of sirens to break the stillness. Then, as if sensing he was out of time, the man stood, pocketed his tools, and bolted just as the faint wail of sirens became audible. When the police arrived, I showed them the footage. They promised to increase patrols in the area and advised me to install additional security measures. For the next few days, I was on edge. I couldn't focus on work, constantly checking the camera feed and replaying the footage in my head. Had I been targeted? Was he watching my house, waiting for another opportunity? The uncertainty was almost worse than the initial fear. Then, one night, something happened that pushed my anxiety into overdrive. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting in the living room scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet, except for my laptop charging on the coffee table. Suddenly, my doorbell camera app sent a ping to my phone. I froze. It wasn't just a motion detection alert. It was a live video feed of someone standing on my porch. My stomach tightened as I grabbed my phone to take a closer look. The person was wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, obscuring his features. He wasn't carrying any package, just standing there. I stared at the screen, debating whether to confront them through the camera or stay quiet. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, the figure leaned closer to the door, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside. My heart was racing now. I slowly reached for my phone's microphone to speak through the camera, but before I could say anything, the person stepped back, his head snapping toward the side of the house, my backyard. He moved quickly, disappearing off-screen. I didn't wait to see what he was doing. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. While I was on the call, I checked the live feed from the backyard camera. Nothing. But the thought of someone lurking just beyond the frame sent chills through me. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights illuminating the whole street. They checked the property but didn't find anyone. Still, the officer I spoke to seemed concerned. "This isn't the first report we've had about someone like this," he said, jotting down notes. "Stay vigilant and let us know if you see anything else." The next week was a blur of hyper-awareness. I barely slept, keeping my phone by my side and refreshing the camera feeds obsessively. Then, about a week later, I got a call from the police. They'd apprehended a man matching the description in connection with a series of attempted break-ins. Among the items they found in his possession were several fake uniforms, lock-picking tools, and a list of addresses, including mine. Even after his arrest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I even started taking a self-defense class. The rational part of me knew the immediate danger was gone, but the emotional scars lingered. The scariest part? It wasn't some elaborate plan or high-tech scheme. It was just a guy with a fake uniform and a knack for deception. These days, I'm more cautious. I still love the convenience of home deliveries, but I'm vigilant about who I open the door for. And every time my doorbell camera pings, I feel a twinge of unease, wondering if the next person on my porch will be as harmless as they seem. If these stories made you triple check your locks, smash that like button, and share with friends who love a good chill. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you're always in the loop for our next spine-tingling upload. Got your own creepy stalker tale? Drop it in the comments. We're dying to hear all the unsettling details. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and maybe invest in a doorbell camera. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.